Hello teachers, in this video we're going to be talking about our first stop, which is digital foundations. As I'm going to be talking about digital foundations inside of the Padlet, you're going to notice this slide, and I've also linked in the Padlet all of the resources that you see listed below. I'm going to be opening them as I kind of go over them, but the first thing I wanted to do is I wanted to talk about the why. Why do we have digital foundations in our district? And when I go out and speak at presentations, this is honestly the most important topic that I talk about anytime that I speak. So to give you a history on that, we kind of have to think back to when we were in the middle of COVID. And some of you might remember this, but some might not. But we actually had parents that were picketing outside of our district office, and they were actually picketing about Canvas. I was mortified when I noticed this, and I immediately was like, I don't understand. What are they so upset about? And what a lot of parents, as I started to reach out and ask, a lot of parents were telling me that what each teacher's Canvas course looked like was completely different. So as their child was going throughout the day, and we didn't notice this as much when we were in person, but when they were doing it virtually, they would notice a significant difference between each one of the Canvas courses. Now, keep in mind, I'm talking about Canvas right now, but I'm going to give you the full gamut and how all these pieces go together, and we're also going to talk about how this ties into Google Classroom. So back to my little story there. As I started to reach out to parents, I sat down with administrators, sat down with teachers, and we started to talk about this. I knew that everyone had a lot on their plate, and I knew that if I was going to talk about having a consistency piece, that I wanted to make sure that people knew the why. Because we all want what's best for students and what's best for families. Because when you're in an environment, we're used to the fact that, several of us might remember the day and age when, we weren't doing anything digitally. And so how we organized our folders and whatnot, that was really based on the individual's need. But a digital platform, which is where students are getting their daily digital work, which is the majority of the way that they're getting their work, that user experience needs to be consistent. And the reason for that is because it's not just that student that is using it, it's also multiple people that are assisting them along the way. So I began having those discussions, and we sat down and we even talked with our union reps, and we talked about that need, and everyone saw the importance of why we needed to start this movement. Now, when we started this experience, we started it at the secondary level. So in a moment, I'm going to show you some of the pieces that we came up with. If you are in secondary and you're part of this cohort, you might remember when all of this came out, but some of you may have gotten hired after all of this occurred, and you may not understand why we do all these connecting pieces. So as we sat down with a group of different stakeholders, and we were coming up with this consistent Canvas digital experience, we began to talk about the home page first. Now, if you are only using Google Classroom, the two platforms, think of Canvas as a more robust version of Google Classroom. In Google Classroom, you have the stream, which is kind of like whenever you open it up and you go inside of something. In Canvas, we call that the home page. Prior to doing the consistent digital experience, we had a lot going on the home page. And what we discovered after talking to students and talking to parents, they said, we really just need clear routes of knowing where I can find similar items no matter what the class is that my student is in. So we went through a lot of discussion about this, and we ended up coming up with 3 buttons: an agenda, class resources, and contact. Because every time we would talk about, well, what do you think should be on it, it always circled back to these items could fit in one of these 3 categories. Now, one of the things that I noticed as I was helping teachers with doing Canvas can be a lot for a teacher to learn how to use. It started out in the college level, and the company has grown to the fact that they use it at high schools. Some school districts use it even all the way down to kindergarten. I'm a firm believer that Canvas should be used at secondary only, basically because it does have a lot of bells and whistles, and again, it is a lot to be able to use it. So when I went out and I started to train teachers and started to help them out with this, I wanted them to know, hey, do you realize at the college level, there's somebody called an instructional designer that it's actually their full-time job to help make the Canvas courses for the professor. And I said, hey, you guys in secondary, you have to be a full-time teacher, and it's almost like managing a full-time website at the same time. Google Classroom is a lot easier to manage than something like Canvas. So as we started to talk about what we can do to make things easier for teachers, I said, I want whatever we design to be simple so that a teacher they are still going to use Canvas, but I want it to be in such a simple form that it's easier for them to learn it and manage it and maintain it throughout the school year. So underneath on the home page, we had in there, just type in a little blurb. So that's what the teachers do inside of there. Inside of the agenda, we then had a discussion about what is it that students and parents are commonly looking for. And they said, well, we're always looking at what's going to be covered during the week. And I don't mean in like a sub-plan format. I mean condensed, short, sweet, to the point, assignments, assessments coming up, and it has to have the ability to see previous weeks. Now, when we started to discuss this, at one point we were like, do we tell everybody that they have to use Google Slides, or do we tell everybody that they need to use a Google Doc? And this is where it was great because we got feedback from teachers and different stakeholders. And a lot of people said, hey, and I didn't want to have to dictate and say, oh, this is the only way that you can do your agenda. As a lot of you teachers know, everybody has their own way that they want to do it. So what became more important to us was the content on the agenda. But the type of agenda that a teacher uses was made a choice for them in the secondary level. So after we rolled out the agenda, then we just talked about the basics of class resources and contact. Inside of Canvas, there is what they call a sidebar, and that's where you see different items listed. We noticed, and this is going to sound very nitpicky, but everybody had things organized in different ways. And so we started to say, oh, well, what if every course in Canvas had home, announcements, modules, and assignments in that order at the top? There's tons of bells and whistles inside of Canvas, and we said, hey, you can include those if you want, but these 4 items have to be in that position on the sidebar. So it doesn't matter if I'm going into my art class, if I'm going into biology, if I'm going into a construction class. I know as a student and a parent, it's going to be in that same format if I need to get any help. Now, prior to this, a lot of teachers were using Pages. And the problem with that is that there was no organization, and we ended up having a bajillion pages inside of a Canvas course. So we then said you need to put things in modules, and we do not want pages visible because it's kind of like seeing the inside of a junk drawer, if that makes sense. We also made some adjustments with assignment and the calendar, and we had some other suggestions. But in a nutshell, this is where this whole consistency piece started. So it started at the secondary level. Then once I got secondary, using the model, and at first, everybody was like, oh, I don't think this is going to work. But once we got into the first month of school after we rolled it out, it was amazing with the transformation that we saw. And honestly, that piece with the agenda and having that very simple homepage and just those little components on the sidebar made such a huge difference. And I cannot stress that enough, because if you can't find your digital work, I've already lost the kid from the get-go. So to me, that was a huge success. But I also knew, hey, at the intermediate level, they're taking devices home daily. And even though they're using Google Classroom instead, I needed to start to roll it down into that area. So I'm going to show you over here, and I wanted you to see how all of these things tie together, because I took what I learned from secondary and I applied components into the intermediate level. And that way, when I did that, then a kid could see it increase as they get older. So one of the first things in Google Classroom was the naming of the Google Classroom. Again, this is going to seem like a very tiny and minute thing, but if we have different names inside of the Google Classroom, then it can be confusing to a student. Unfortunately, Google has these settings that are inside of Google Classroom, which I wish that they looked differently, but they don't. So I needed everybody to set up their settings the same. And so that way we can have it all look consistently. Now, this is the first piece that you're going to notice that is exactly like my secondary. We started telling at the intermediate level, you need to be using an agenda. Where did that come from? Secondary, when we rolled that out and it was going so well. So then we rolled it down to Kitley and Edgewood and said, it's the same verbiage that we did with Canvas, and we gave them some options, but you'll notice that what they have to include is exactly the same. So they had to have that posted on the stream, which again in Canvas it would be like their homepage. Then we started talking about topic organization. Remember when I told you that at the secondary level they used to have a bunch of pages, and we said we want you to organize it into modules. Well, a module in Google Classroom is called a topic. So then we started telling teachers at the 4 through 6 level, you need to be using topics. So that way it starts that foundation of, I know where I'm going to get my digital work, and it's going to be organized in this format. Okay? Now, one thing that I did notice inside of Google Classroom was that the way that people were naming assignments inside of it was a lot different depending upon the teacher, and it would always chop off like the date if the teacher was trying to put the date on it. So we added some pieces in there. If like, hey, if you're going to add an assignment, I want you to put in the date using the format that you see listed below. Again, all these tiny little things add up, and you guys don't see it, but we do. I do, especially at the district level, and I cannot tell you how many people have reached out and said these little tiny changes have made massive impact across the district. The last thing that I started to roll out, and that includes this year, was deleting often. Now, this is something that is different from Canvas. Inside of Google Classroom, it can turn into that junk drawer look pretty quickly. And because you're keeping your Google Classroom for the entire year, I started to tell teachers, hey, do you realize that a kid has to scroll through everything to get to your work that you may have? So I said, we probably need to start having some kind of like cleanup, weekly, monthly, at least do something each 9 weeks to try to keep it kind of cleaned up. And again, that was just something optional that I added this year. Now, so I told you that I did it. We had it at the secondary level. We had it at the 4-6. This school year, I then rolled it out at the K3 level. Now, at the K3 level, it's a different scenario because we're not taking devices home unless it would turn into an emergency like COVID or inclement weather or something like that. So keeping that in mind, you're going to notice that their consistency pieces have some components, but not all of the components. We want them to name their Google Classroom in a certain fashion, so I did keep that piece. The settings in Google Classroom, that's the same as grades 4 through 6. We did talk about topic organization, and I want them to be using topics, but at the K3 level, I wanted them to start using emojis in front of them. And here's something that's unique to K-3. I asked them to organize their topics following their schedule of the day that they follow in their classroom. And people might be thinking, well, why are you doing that? Because, if I need to use it, why does it matter if it's in that order? I am always trying to be as proactive as what I can. And when I'm going to be proactive in this manner, it means that I know that if we ever have a case where we have to go synchronous or we have to go asynchronous, it is very clear to our guardians at home when they're assisting their children, they know the schedule already because it's already all taken care of in Google Classroom. They already know every block of time and when they would need to join and so on. And in addition, I also mentioned to them about, the deleting often and so on. Now, a couple of links that I'm going to point out that, again, I do want you to dive into and take a look. I have some examples because I knew if I'm going to ask people to do this, that you need to be able to see, well, what is she talking about? What does this look like? Now, I'm going to start with K-3 and we'll go back up to secondary just so you can see what these pieces look like. So what does good instructional design look like? Here's an example of the beginning of the year. I just took some screenshots inside of some teachers where you can see what they've done. What this does, and I try to keep these examples and I'll keep adding to this as I go. And again, K-3 just started it this year. It's easy for me to talk about it in a document, but I know that teachers need to be able to have something as a reference. So I try to have all of these as examples. All right. So now I'm going to show you what this looks like in 4 through 6. And in 4 through 6, I actually have it by some different categories. And I'm going to start off, this is a person that taught science and social studies when they were at Edgewood. And you can see they took a blurb. It's very plain on whenever they go out to the stream. And you're going to notice their agenda. You notice their topic organization. We have a couple other examples because I didn't want to have just one example. I didn't want a teacher to go, oh, well, if she does it that way, that's exactly what I need to do. Obviously, everyone's going to have their own flair to it, but I wanted them to see different ways that it looked. Now, when we take a look at a math class and their agenda, with using everyday math, it's pretty dang easy for you to be able to fill in that agenda. And also her units are pretty easy. I have an example of social studies in here. I've got a couple for social studies. And then I've also got some in here for language. Okay? So again, I'm really wanting you to see how it starts out with kind of those emojis and it goes in your schedule order. Now we've bumped up. We're in grades 4 through 6. We have topics. And now we've introduced that weekly agenda. Again, there's no purpose of having the weekly agenda at the K-3 level because they're not taking the devices home every day and they wouldn't be taking a look at that. Okay? Now, with Canvas, I wanted to show you some examples of what I had from Canvas. And in here, Let me get rid of that. In here we can see that I screenshotted, this is Chuck Gilmore. He's over at the junior high, just a little blurb. This is what his homepage looks like. This is what his modules look like. So think if you're a Google Classroom user, these would be topics, and then it has the information underneath. This is another, so before, when teachers were using a lot of pages inside of Canvas, they were doing like a page a day, and that's why we had so many pages. So I had been really trying to teach the teachers, how can you repackage your content and use the least amount of pages possible? So he's a math teacher, and I said, well, what if you put all of your resources for Unit 1 on one page rather than having a page per day? Now, instead of having to maintain 18 or 19 pages for that unit, you got to maintain one page, okay? And that really helped them realize, oh, I could be organizing my Canvas a lot cleaner than the way I had been doing it in the past. When I met with Mark Woodrow over at the high school, he did the same concept, but he made it even more basic than that, where he just used a table inside of Canvas. When Val Thorson was doing Spanish at the high school, she's the type that when she went into her modules, she loved to use Google Slides. And so under each unit, she would have a link to all of her lessons for that unit that were packaged in Google Slides. Again, I want teachers to see that there are different options. So you've got a lot of different things that you can take a look at here. But I wanted to show you what I want you to do after you're done watching this video. So inside of the Padlet, I'm going to ask you to respond to some of these questions that you see here. So the first one is, discuss why you think digital foundations are important in our school district. So based on the history, based on everything that I've shared with you now, why do you think that it is important to have them? What are some of your thoughts after hearing the why behind this consistent digital foundation? And then the third piece inside of Padlet is that I want you to take a screenshot of what it looks like in your course. So if you're a secondary teacher participating in this, do a picture of like your homepage and like a picture of either your modules or like what your agenda piece looks like, just so that those people that are in the younger grades can take a look so they kind of have a feel of what this looks like. If you're in the younger grades, take a picture of how you have things set up. At the intermediate level, you can show us how you have your agenda and kind of how you have your topics laid out. Of course, the other piece of that inside of the Padlet is that after you've done your post and made your comments, that you do need to respond. You only need to respond once to somebody else, but in just a second here, I'm going to show you what this looks like in Padlet. Okay, so this is what the Padlet is going to look like for this first stop with digital foundations. The first thing I want to make sure that people know is that before you start posting, you need to make your own Padlet account, okay? Then that way when you go into this Padlet link, then it'll automatically track your name, so that way it's easier for us to track it for credit. Last year when we did this cohort, I didn't tell people that they had to have a Padlet account. It's free to have an account. But it then got a little hairy because people would post and forget to add their name, and then I was having to reach out to people to get to all of that information. So definitely make sure that you do that first. All of the resources that I showed you inside of the video are going to be linked out here, so you can click on them and it'll take you back out to them. Over here is where you're going to see those tasks that I'm asking you to do in Padlet. You can start to comment here, just right underneath. As people start to comment in there, then it's going to start to trail kind of like down and it's like you may have to scroll and so on. If it gets to be too much, you can always hit the plus sign over here, and you could also put in what your, you know, like your screenshot and your comments and thoughts, okay? So the last piece of this, I want to remind you how you get paid for completing all of the tasks for this month. Okay, so on this screen, this is showing you what we're going to be checking to make sure that you have completed everything to get your payment, which is $75, once you have completed the task. Task number 1 is view the tutorial, which is the video I'm doing right now. And you're going to see that in Edpuzzle. I will be uploading this to Edpuzzle in just a few moments, where it says apply strategy in your classroom with documentation for proof. In this case, that's going to be the screenshot, what I'm asking you to put on the Padlet, okay? And participate in the Padlet discussion boards, which I just went over the questions that you need to do. Now, if you are a mentor watching this, the mentor is going to be checking the Padlet to make sure that you've added the necessary items, and the mentor from your building, if you have one assigned, they will be in contact with me and saying, hey Nadine, this person is ready for payment. The one piece that you don't have to do this with this stop, I've already like marked it out here, is it was like analyzing, you know, doing data analytics. You don't need to do anything with that because this is just the digital foundations. This video is running a little bit longer than what I had intended, but with this being our very first video and what you need to do, I wanted to make sure that I covered all the items that you needed to do for this month. As always, feel free to email me, nadine.gilkison@ftcsc.org, and I'm happy to answer any questions that you have.